All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into a really interesting topic, border crossings in Texas.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, it might be a little more complicated than the headlines would have us believe, huh?
Exactly. Our main source today is this article from the Associated Press, Arrests for Illegal Border Crossings Fall in Texas. It was published just a few days ago on February 14th, 2025. What caught my eye was this. The new administration is really focused on border security, right?
Right.
We even saw record high apprehension numbers just a few months ago, but now arrests have just plummeted. It's like, what's going on here?
It really is. It's like a total shift, right? And the article really highlights that change. On the ground, things are very different now.
Totally. Like they even talk about the Rio Grande Valley, which, I mean, everyone knows it was like, the spot for crossings.
Right.
And now the agents are patrolling for hours and not finding anyone.
Yeah, they talk about an empty Border Patrol bus, river landings that are just deserted. There's even this image of a single teddy bear just left behind.
It's crazy. It's like a ghost town. Okay, so we know the situation's different. The article says Border Patrol arrests are down from like 250,000 in December to just 350 a day now.
Yeah, 250,000 in December of 2023. That's a huge drop.
Huge. So what's the deal? What's causing this?
Well, the article talks about a few things. One of the things they point to is this pretty significant increase in enforcement. But on the Mexican side of the border, so Mexico's really starting to crack down on migration through their own country.
So Mexico's kind of stepping up their game and trying to control the flow of migrants themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And then, there's also the stricter U.S. asylum policies, which...
Oh, right. The article mentioned those.
And those policies were actually put in place before the new administration. So, that's another interesting piece of the puzzle. They're making it way harder for people to claim asylum in the U.S.
So it's like a double whammy. More enforcement in Mexico, and it's harder to get asylum here. Makes sense that fewer people would try, I guess.
Right. And then on top of that, there's Governor Abbott's program in Texas, Operation Lone Star. And the article really highlights how that has contributed to this decline.
Can you remind our listener about Operation Lone Star? Like, what's it all about?
Sure. So basically, Texas has really taken border security into its own hands, right? It's this multi-billion-dollar initiative, and they've flooded the border with Texas National Guard and state police. So, it's a very visible presence.
So basically, Texas is saying, we're not waiting for the feds. We're taking care of this ourselves.
Pretty much. And it seems to be having an effect. But it does raise some questions, about the whole state versus federal authority thing when it comes to immigration. It gets a little murky.
Yeah, especially with that new agreement where Texas law enforcement can actually arrest and detain people now. That was always a federal thing before.
Exactly. It kind of blurs the line. So it's like, on the one hand, things seem pretty calm on the ground. The journalists in the article saw empty buses, no migrants. It makes the border look pretty under control.
But then you've got the new administration coming in and declaring a national emergency at the border on day one.
Right. Their very first day. And they're talking about record levels of illegal crossings, even though we're seeing the opposite.
Yeah, I saw that too. Like, the new attorney general even put out a memo about it. It's weird, right? Like, what data are they looking at?
Right. It's definitely a disconnect. Like, what's the reality here?
And then, there was also that shooting incident the article mentioned where the Border Patrol agent fired on someone they thought was a smuggler.
Yeah, that's a pretty stark reminder. It makes it very real. Even if the numbers are down, things are still tense.
For sure. And it's easy to get caught up in the politics of it all, but it's important to remember the human side of things. I mean, when I read about that teddy bear, that really stuck with me.
It's powerful, isn't it? Like, what happened to that child? Where are they now?
Exactly. It makes you think about the real people behind all of this.
It's not just numbers and policies. These are real lives.
Well, we've definitely got a lot to think about here, but we've only just started.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot more to unpack, lots of questions to ask. It really makes you think about the human side of it,
Totally. Like, are they safe? Do they get to where they're going? It's a lot to think about.
Absolutely. And, it's not just one story like this. It's happening every day. So many stories that we don't hear about. For every person apprehended at the border, there's families, communities, whole networks of people whose lives are affected by this.
It's a good reminder that we're not just talking about statistics here. It's people making really tough decisions, often risking everything for a better life.
Exactly. And that's something we need to keep in mind when we talk about policy changes and enforcement strategies. It can't just be about effectiveness. We have to think about the human impact, too.
So let's get back to some of those policy changes. We touched on those stricter asylum policies earlier, the ones put in place before the new administration. What do those actually look like, and how have they affected things?
Well, basically, they make it much harder to qualify for asylum in the U.S. They've expanded the definition of what's considered a safe third country.
So now asylum seekers have to seek protection in the first safe country they get to, not just come straight to the U.S.
Right, which is often Mexico.
But wouldn't that put some people in danger? Like, what if they're fleeing violence in their home country and the first country they get to isn't actually safe for them?
Yeah, that's a big concern that human rights groups have brought up. They're saying it forces vulnerable people to stay in places that can't actually protect them.
So these asylum policies are a big part of why we're seeing this decrease in crossings. But what about Texas and what they're doing? We talked about Operation Lone Star and how they've basically put a wall of state troopers and National Guard along the border. What are the long-term consequences of that, a state taking on that kind of role?
Yeah, that's a big question, and it's something legal experts are already debating. Some people are saying Texas is overstepping its boundaries here, encroaching on federal power over immigration.
So they're worried about setting a precedent.
Yeah, and about potential conflicts between the state and the feds.
It does sound like a legal battle waiting to happen, but it also seems like it's working, at least in terms of deterring crossings.
No doubt it's had an impact, but the question is how long will it last? And what are the bigger implications for border security and for that whole balance of power between states and the federal government? It's still up in the air.
It's interesting, though, to see a state take such an active role in something that's usually handled by the feds.
It really is. And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, especially with the new administration in Washington.
And speaking of the new administration, we talked about how their rhetoric seems to be clashing with what's actually happening on the ground. Like they're talking about a national emergency while arrests are plummeting. What do you make of that?
Well, there are a few possibilities. One is that they're just overstating the situation. Maybe for political reasons. They ran on a platform of strong border security, so maybe they feel like they have to project that image even if the data doesn't back it up.
So playing to their base, even if it means exaggerating the problem.
It's possible. Another explanation could be that their policies, although they're still new, are already having an effect. Maybe all the tough talk and the focus on enforcement is sending a message, that the U.S. is serious about cracking down.
So even if people aren't actually getting caught at the baiter, maybe they're getting scared off before they even try.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that things at the border change all the time. What we're seeing now might be completely different in a few months.
Right. So many things can affect migration patterns, the economy, political instability, even the weather. It's constantly changing.
Definitely. And as we try to figure it all out, we can't forget about the human stories, like we talked about with that teddy bear. Those stories remind us that this isn't just some abstract policy debate.
It's about real people's lives.
And finding ways to address the issue that are both effective and humane.
That's the key, finding that balance. It's amazing how much there is to this issue. We've talked about the drop in border crossings, all the policies in play, the enforcement strategies, and of course the human side of it all.
And it's so important to remember that, behind the numbers, the politics, there are real people whose lives are being changed by all of this.
Yeah, that's really stuck with me. And, another thing that I've been thinking about is the whole idea of perspective. Like the article we've been talking about, it paints a pretty different picture of the border than what we usually see.
Definitely. I mean, these journalists were right there on the ground, riding along with the Border Patrol, seeing it all firsthand. It's a level of detail you don't usually get.
Right. It really makes you realize how much our understanding of something like this depends on how it's presented to us. What sources we're getting our information from, what stories are being highlighted.
Exactly. It's all about critical thinking and media literacy. We have to be aware of bias and sensationalism and all that stuff. It's so easy for complex issues to get oversimplified in the news.
Totally. And we all do it. It's easy to get caught up in those headlines, especially when they play on our fears or, just confirm what we already believe.
Exactly. But we got to remember there's always more to this story.
Always more than one side. And sometimes digging a little deeper can really change how to see things.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to really think about the information they're getting, especially when it comes to these really big emotional issues like immigration.
Yeah, don't just take things at face value. Question those narratives, Look for different sources, different viewpoints. Try to get a handle on all the nuances.
Because finding solutions means understanding the problems. And that takes, thoughtful conversation and respect for different points of view.
It's been a great conversation, and I hope our listeners keep learning and exploring and forming their own opinions.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep learning.